Imagine being the new species on the block, but for nearly 50 years, the entire galaxy writes you off as too terrified to even answer the door. That was the exact situation humanity found itself in. We're in the Great Hall of the Galactic Concord, a breathtaking chamber a mile long, its ceiling a live feed of the star-flecked universe. Representatives from 214 alien species are all here. Presiding over them is High Chancellor Morveth, her silver robes shimmering. At almost 400 years old, she's seen it all. And for the last 60 of those years, she's led this assembly in doing, well, mostly nothing. And that legacy of inaction was about to blow up in their faces. Stick with me, because the underdog that everyone ignored is about to flip the entire galactic chessboard. Her voice, instantly translated for every species present, echoed through the vast hall. "We will now commence the roll call," she announced, her tone saturated with boredom. "Let the official record show attendance for the 47th Annual Summit." The names droned on and on. The Authority Collective? Here. The Belmathy Trade Union? Present. Then, after nearly an hour, the automated system called a name that caused a hush to fall over the entire chamber. Terran Confederation. Instantly, every eye, every sensor, every bizarre alien face turned to look at one single, empty chair in the observer's gallery. For 47 consecutive years, that chair had done nothing but gather dust. Ever since humanity received its invitation to the big leagues, they'd been a complete no-show. Terran Confederation, the system repeated into the profound silence. Nothing. A wave of snickers and quiet jokes rippled through the delegates. High Chancellor Morveth just tapped her console. "Let the record show the Terran Confederation has once again chosen not to attend. We will move on." But before she could continue, a loud, barking laugh echoed from the upper levels. It was Ambassador Breath from the Colossi Dominion, a hulking, scaly beast whose skin was glowing a nasty shade of deep purple, the color of pure contempt. "Why do we even continue this ridiculous charade?" he roared, his voice practically dripping with scorn. "The humans are a pathetic race of primitives, hiding on their little mud ball of a planet behind a single star. They have nothing of value to offer any of us." A few other representatives rumbled their agreement. In their eyes, humans were just some backwater species from a dull corner of the galaxy, discovered by a survey crew 80 years ago and immediately forgotten. High Chancellor Morveth simply raised a hand for silence. "The invitation is permanent. It is a matter of protocol," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "Every species capable of spaceflight is offered a seat at this table. If the humans choose to refuse it, the loss is theirs." And with that, the topic was dismissed, just as it was year after year. The summit quickly shifted to the real emergency, the Rakari hegemony. For 3 straight decades, this savage warrior race had been on a brutal conquest, enslaving dozens of smaller civilizations and pressing millions of innocent people into service for their ever-growing war machine. Ambassador Karath of the Rakari just sat there, his scarred face a mask of utter boredom, while delegate after delegate denounced his people's actions. He had heard these empty threats before. "The Concord must take action," pleaded the representative from the Salathi Republic. "We cannot simply watch as entire cultures are erased from history." But Ambassador Breath, the very same brute who had just mocked humanity, merely scoffed. "And do what exactly? Declare all-out war? The cost in lives and resources would be astronomical. Diplomacy is our only course." The Salathi representative fired back. "We've been attempting diplomacy for 30 years. How many more planets have to burn before we finally admit that it's a complete failure?" The useless debate dragged on for hours. Suggestions were made and were just as quickly dismissed. Sanctions were considered too weak to have any real effect. A direct military strike was seen as far too risky and expensive. So in the end, the summit did the only thing it ever really did. It issued another harshly phrased letter of disapproval. The Rakari ambassador accepted the document with a smug grin, promising his government would give it all the consideration it was due. As he strolled out of the hall, High Chancellor Morveth felt that old, familiar ache in her heart. 60 years she'd been in this chair, and the story was always the same. The powerful do as they please, the weak pay the price, and everyone else just writes angry letters about it. Later that evening, Morveth was in her private quarters when her young assistant Torf hurried in. The summit proceeded, as it always does, Morveth sighed. Another year, another spectacular waste of time. Chancellor, Torf began, his voice tight with worry. You have to see this. Our intelligence branch just flagged some extremely unusual activity in the outer sectors. He passed her a data tablet. As Morveth scanned the report, her ancient eyes grew wide. It described multiple sightings of unidentified ships in deep space, far from any known shipping lanes. These vessels were immense, larger than any warship in the Conquered's combined fleets, and they moved with a grace and speed that hinted at technology generations beyond their own. And whenever a Conquered patrol vessel managed to get close, the mysterious ships would simply disappear. These sightings date back 40 years, Morveth whispered, her voice shaking almost imperceptibly. Why is this the first I'm hearing of it? The reports were filed across different sectors by different crews over decades, Torfith clarified. No one put the pieces together until an analyst decided to run a deep-level pattern search. Chancellor, their flight paths, every single one of them originates from the exact same point in space. Morveth looked up, a cold sense of dread creeping into her bones. Where? Torf inhaled deeply. Human space. The tablet nearly fell from Morveth's grasp as the terrifying reality crashed down on her. The humans, the primitives, the cowards. Who else knows about this? She demanded. No one, Chancellor. The analyst reported it directly to me, and I brought it straight to you. Excellent. Keep it that way, Morveth commanded, her mind racing. She looked at the tablet again. These weren't exploration vessels. These were warships. I want around-the-clock passive surveillance on human space. I want to know everything they do, but they must not know we are watching. A new report on my desk every single day. Yes, Chancellor. What do you suppose is going on? Morveth gazed out at her window at the distant glittering stars. I think, she said, her voice slow and measured, that we mistook their silence for fear. We assumed their absence meant they were irrelevant. She turned back to her assistant, a horrifying new possibility taking shape in her mind. But what if we were completely and utterly wrong? A whole galaxy away, a young Conquered analyst named Yuki Tanaka was asking herself the same question. Her job was to keep tabs on the unimportant species, and humanity was number one on that list. For 3 years, she had been sorting through the most mind-numbingly dull data about Earth until now. It all began with a simple question nobody had ever thought to ask. Why did the humans attend their first 3 summits and then just vanish? The official story was that they simply lost interest. But Yuki decided to dig into the old archives. She uncovered the video logs of those first meetings and watched the human observers. They didn't seem bored. They looked absolutely disgusted. At that time, the Conquered was debating how to respond to the systematic extermination of a race called the Melthari. The debate was painfully familiar. Endless speeches, passionate arguments, and absolutely no real action. The Melthari were wiped out entirely while the Conquered was still trying to schedule its next meeting on the topic. The humans had seen the whole thing, quietly taking notes. Then, they just went home, and they never came back. Yuki found their last official communication. It was brief, polite, and colder than the vacuum of space. The Terran Confederation extends its thanks to the Galactic Conquered for its hospitality and respectfully declines any further participation. That was all. 80 years of nothing. Yuki leaned back in her chair, her heart hammering in her chest. The humans weren't hiding. They were judging. They had taken one look at the most powerful organization in the galaxy, decided it was a toothless debating society full of cowards, and walked away to get ready for a universe they now knew they had to face alone. They weren't primitives. They were students. They had been observing this entire time, charting the galaxy's major powers, learning who the real threats were and who was all talk. The terrifying question was, what did they plan to do with all that information? As she started writing her report, she had a sick feeling that it would just get buried like so many others. But a nod in her gut told her this time was different. Something was about to happen. Far out in the silent, starless void, a storm was brewing. 1,000 ships floated silently in space, a fleet constructed in absolute secrecy, its crews waiting with a perfect, disciplined patience. They had been waiting for a very long time, and tonight, the wait was finally coming to an end. Admiral Chen Wei stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Prometheus, and watched the starfield. At nearly 3 kilometers in length, her vessel carried enough firepower to shatter a small moon into dust. For Chen, it was home. She had devoted 40 years to the fleet, climbing the ranks from a fresh-faced ensign to the supreme commander of all of humanity's armed forces. In all that time, she had never once given the order to fire on another species. No human had. But that was about to change. Admiral, the final intelligence briefing is ready. Have you ever felt like you were screaming at the top of your lungs, but no one was listening? That's exactly how humanity felt for 80 years. Admiral Chen was staring into the blackness of space when her aide, Commander Marcus Webb, came to her side. He was young for his rank, not even 50, but his mind was like a steel trap, and she trusted him with everything. "It's time," Chen said, her voice low. They walked onto the bridge, a massive command center humming with quiet purpose. Her top officers were already there, their faces set like stone. They knew what was coming. On the main screen, a recording of the Galactic Summit from 3 days ago played out. Chen watched the smug face of Ambassador Breath as he brushed off humanity's warnings, followed by the usual pointless debate about the Vicari Empire's latest rampage, a debate that, as always, accomplished nothing. It was a story she'd seen her entire life. "Same old story," Captain Reynolds, her second-in-command, grumbled. "They talk and the galaxy burns." "This time is different," Commander Webb said, his voice barely a whisper. He changed the image on the screen. Now it showed a tiny, lonely space station, floating in a system so remote it was practically a myth. "This is Sanctuary Station. It was built 12 years ago as a safe haven for anyone running from the Vicari. Right now, 50,000 people from over 30 different species are living there." Chen knew all about Sanctuary. Humanity's spies had been secretly watching over it from day one. It was one of the last glimmers of hope in a galaxy growing darker by the day. "The Vicari found it," Webb said, and the words landed like lead weights. "A battle fleet left their homeworld 6 days ago. At their current speed, they'll be there in less than 18 hours. A heavy, suffocating silence filled the bridge. Everyone there knew what the Vicari did to refugee stations. It wouldn't be a fight. It would be a slaughter. Anyone who survived the initial attack would be dragged off in chains, and the station would be turned to dust, a brutal warning to anyone else who dared to show compassion. "And what's the Concord's response?" Chen asked, though she could have written the script herself. "They've scheduled an emergency meeting to observe the situation. If they stick to their usual plan, they'll argue for a few days, then release a strongly worded letter. By then, 50,000 men, women, and children will be gone." "Of course they will," Chen said, her voice dropping to a dangerous chill as she looked at the faces of her crew. She had known these officers for decades. They were family. They had all trained for this exact moment, knowing a day like this would come. But knowing a hurricane is on the way and actually feeling the foundations of your house start to crack are two very different things. "Before we go any further," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "I need every single one of you to be absolutely certain about the choice we're about to make. No doubts, no second thoughts." She walked to the holographic map in the center of the room. It showed the tiny flicker of stars that was the Terran Confederation, a forgotten little neighborhood on the edge of the galaxy. It looked almost pathetic next to the sprawling empires that ran everything. 80 years ago, a conquered ship just happened to stumble on Earth. We were barely figuring out how to travel between our own planets. We were naive, hopeful, and so excited to find out we weren't alone in the universe. Chen waved her hand, and the map zoomed out, showing the glittering, endless web of the galaxy. They invited us to join their amazing civilization. They showed us all the wonders, the giant trade hubs, the faster-than-light highways, an alliance of 1,000 different worlds. We sent our smartest people, our most hopeful diplomats, ready to learn how such a massive, diverse group could live in peace. The hologram changed, showing old, grainy clips of those first human delegates, their faces full of awe. But what we found there shattered our hopes. We found a civilization that had decided that a little bit of evil was a fair price to pay for order. We saw the big guys push around and crush the little guys, and the conquered just looked the other way. We saw entire planets sold into bondage because nobody wanted to mess up their profitable trade agreements to step in. The image shifted to the Melthari crisis, endless, useless meetings while an entire species died. The Melthari were wiped from existence while the conquered was busy forming committees. 12 billion lives just erased, and all the conquered had to offer were their sincere apologies. Chen let the horror of that failure sink into the quiet room. So our ancestors made a decision. We would not be part of a system that let monsters run free. We refused to sign our name to a club that was built on pretending not to see the evil right in front of them. But we were also tiny, weak. If we had screamed and shouted about the injustice, they would have snuffed us out like a candle. So we played along, Captain Reynolds said, finishing her thought. We played along, Chen confirmed. But we were not sitting on our hands. The hologram flickered and then revealed humanity's most guarded secret. Shipyards carved out of the inside of asteroids, research labs hidden in the clouds of gas giants, military academies scattered across moons that everyone thought were dead, an entire fleet, an entire military built in the dark completely off the books. For 80 years we prepared. We learned everything about every species in the Concorde. We learned how their tech works. We mapped their trade routes. We found every single one of their weak spots. We built a fleet that could stand against any of the great powers. And we waited. The display turned into a horrifying slideshow of intelligence photos showing the pure evil of the Vicari. People being sold like cattle, labor camps that were just death sentences, and entire planets stripped bare. We watched the Vicari burn a path of terror across the galaxy. We watched the conquered do nothing. And we wrote down every crime, waiting for the right moment, the one perfect chance to finally do something. Why did we wait so long? A young officer suddenly asked, his voice thick with anger and sadness. If we had this power, why did we let so many suffer? Chen had wrestled with that same question more times than she could count. The answer was never easy to swallow. Because power without wisdom is just another kind of monster. If we had charged in half-cocked, thinking we knew everything, we would have just become another empire. We would have just been the new bullies on the block. She looked right at the young man, her eyes filled with a deep, painful understanding. It's easy to use a weapon. It's the hardest thing in the world to use it for the right reason. We waited because we had to be strong enough to win the war, but wise enough not to become the very thing we were fighting. The screen switched back to the live feed of Sanctuary Station, the red icons of the Vicari fleet closing in like sharks. In 18 hours, 50,000 people will die unless someone helps them, and we all know the conquered isn't coming. Chen stood tall, her voice now ringing like a bell through the silent bridge. Today, humanity helps. Today, this galaxy finds out who we really are. We are not conquerors. We are not masters. We are guardians. She turned to her communications officer. Get on the horn to the fleet. All ships prepare for an immediate jump. We move in 12 hours. Ma'am, you mean the entire fleet? The officer's jaw was on the floor. That's over 1,000 warships. I'm aware of how many ships I have, Lieutenant. Yes, Admiral. Sending the order now. All across human space, in hidden docks and secret bases, a giant woke from its slumber. Engines roared to life, weapon systems hummed with power, and crews scrambled to their posts. 1,000 ships, each a masterpiece of engineering the galaxy didn't even know was possible, were about to make their grand entrance. Chen walked back to the main viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, 50,000 refugees were praying for a miracle they had no reason to expect. They had no clue that help was screaming towards them at impossible speeds. They had no idea that a species they'd likely never even heard of had been their secret guardian angel all along. Commander Webb came to stand beside her. "Admiral, after this, there's no turning back. The whole galaxy will know what we can do. They'll be afraid of us." "Let them be," Chen said softly. "A little fear can be a useful thing. But my hope is that they'll also understand." "Understand what, ma'am?" "That we didn't build this navy to take over. We built it to be a shield. Every single ship, every weapon, every soldier we have exists for one purpose: to stand between the innocent and the monsters who want to hurt them." A small, sad smile touched her lips. This galaxy has had more than enough empires. It's had enough corporate armies and political games. The one thing it's never had is a protector. She turned to Webb, her face now a mask of pure determination. "And that's what we are. That was the choice we made 80 years ago, not to be rulers, but to be guardians." Webb nodded slowly, the enormous weight of what they were about to do finally sinking in. "In 12 hours, we're going to turn the galaxy upside down. First, we're going to save 50,000 lives," she corrected him gently. "Then we'll let the galaxy shake, and we'll be there to help put the pieces back together." With a slight nod, she accepted it. From now on, their future was an unwritten story they'd have to create together. The hours crept by. Chen went over battle plans, checked in with her captains, and snatched quiet moments where she could. But sleep was a lost cause. Her mind was racing, fixated on the incredible thing that was about to unfold. The instant 1,000 human warships would blink into existence and rewrite the destiny of the entire galaxy. At last, the countdown hit 0. "All ships are green," Commander Webb's calm voice announced. "The fleet is ready for the jump." Chen settled into her command chair, her eyes scanning the bridge one last time. Every face she saw was a picture of pure, focused determination. Her crew was ready. "Signal the fleet," she commanded, her voice steady as a rock. "Make the jump." Can you imagine watching everything you've ever built, a safe haven for 50,000 souls who had nowhere else to go, about to be turned into a cosmic tomb? That was the living nightmare Station Master Praith was trapped in as 60 state-of-the-art warships closed in on her home. The Verkari battle group had arrived 2 hours ahead of schedule, and her tiny defense force, a handful of converted freighters and old patrol boats, was completely and totally outgunned. For 80 years, humanity had been a ghost, a forgotten myth in the galaxy's long history. But if you think you know how this story ends, you should probably stick around, because you're about to be proven very, very wrong. Praith felt the crushing weight of her many years. Her scales, once shimmering, had faded to a dull, dusty gray, and her heart ached with the memory of too many farewells. She had established Sanctuary Station 12 years ago, hoping it could be a beacon of hope for refugees fleeing the galaxy's unending wars. Now, it looked like it was going to be their final grave. "The Verkari are demanding our unconditional surrender," her communications officer said, his voice strained with anxiety. "They're willing to take the station's population as assets of the hegemony." He didn't have to explain what that meant. He was offering slavery for 50,000 people who had already lost everything. "What's the latest from the Conquered?" Praith asked, though she already knew the answer would be bad. "The Emergency Council is still deadlocked, ma'am. No decision has been made." Of course not. The politicians at the Conquered would bicker and give speeches while her people were being shackled. It was the oldest story in the universe. The strong take whatever they want, and the weak are left to suffer. Inform the Verkari that we need time to consider their generous offer, Priath said, a desperate attempt to buy just a few more minutes. It was a useless gesture, and she knew it. It wouldn't change a thing, but it might give a few kids a chance to scramble into an escape pod, or a few families a final moment to embrace. Aboard the Verkari flagship, the Dominance, Fleet Commander Torax let out a low, amused chuckle. He'd seen this sad little performance a dozen times before. The desperate plea for more time was always a delicious little appetizer before the main course of total domination. "They're asking for time," his second-in-command reported with a sneer. "Give them 10 minutes, Torax said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "Then begin the assault. I want this station secured before the Conquered finally works up the nerve to do something." His officers all laughed. The idea was laughable. Torax leaned back, watching the station on his main screen. It just floated there in the blackness like a trapped animal, surrounded by his pack of hungry wolves. Soon, it would all be his. The useful refugees would be sent to labor camps. The rest would be disposed of. It was just another Tuesday for the hegemony. "Commander," his sensor technician suddenly interrupted, his voice tight. "I'm detecting something strange." "Define strange," Torax grumbled, his good mood instantly evaporating. "There are massive energy readings popping up at the edge of the system. A lot of them. I've never seen a fold space signature like this before." Torax bolted upright, his amusement gone. The readings were bizarre, appearing just beyond the effective range of his best scanners. "How many contacts are we talking about?" he demanded. The tech swallowed hard, his face turning pale. "Commander, the system is tracking. It's tracking over 1,000 individual signatures. That's impossible." "I'm running diagnostics right now, sir," the officer stammered, his fingers flying across the console. "Commander, they're coming into focus. They're ships. 1,000 ships on a direct course for us, and they're moving at an unbelievable speed." Before Torax could even wrap his head around those words, the universe outside his viewport tore itself open. 1,000 pinpricks of light blossomed in the void as ship after ship ripped through the fabric of reality, snapping into a perfect geometric battle formation. They were gigantic, making even his mighty cruisers look like children's toys, and they moved with a silent, synchronized precision that screamed of technology centuries ahead of his own. "What in the stars is that?" Torax yelled. "Identify them." "They're not in any database, Commander. Their design doesn't match anything we've ever seen." The sensor officer's voice was shaking with fear. "They're forming a sphere around our fleet and the station. They're boxing us in." 1,000 warships created a flawless cage of metal and light, their weapon ports sliding open, every single one aimed squarely at his fleet. Torax had never witnessed such a display of overwhelming force. No one in the galaxy had a fleet this massive or this advanced. Just then, his comms channel crackled to life. A voice, calm and crisp, spoke in flawless galactic standard. "This is Admiral Chen Wei of the Terran Defense Fleet." For the first time in his long and decorated career, Torax felt the icy grip of genuine terror. Humans. "We are not here to negotiate," the voice continued, as cold and empty as space itself. "We are not here to discuss politics. We are here because 50,000 people are about to be enslaved or killed, and somebody had to step up. Verkari commanders, you have 10 minutes to power down your weapons and leave this system. If you do, you will be allowed to depart peacefully. You will not receive a second chance." The channel went dead. Torax could only stare, completely dumbfounded. Humans. The primitive species that had been hiding in some forgotten corner of the galaxy for 80 years. The same species everyone had dismissed as a footnote in history. They had built this. 1,000 ships, an unbreakable cage built around his entire battle group. They were terrifyingly beautiful, machines engineered for one purpose and one purpose only: total war. They could have vaporized his fleet without a word, but instead, they were giving him a way out. For a split second, Torax actually thought about taking it. Living to fight another day was always the smart move. But then he remembered the laws of the hegemony. Returning in failure, even with his fleet intact, meant a slow, public execution for him and his entire bloodline. He'd rather die fighting. "All ships, prepare for attack," he commanded, his voice cracking slightly. "Target the lead human ship. Let's show these primitives how the hegemony deals with anyone who stands in our way." His officers looked at him like he had lost his mind, but years of brutal training kicked in, and the Vakari fleet began to slowly move into position. On the bridge of the human flagship, Admiral Chen watched them maneuver. She wasn't surprised. Arrogance was a terminal illness. "All ships weapons free," she said, her voice perfectly even. "Disable them, don't destroy them. We need their crews alive." And just like that, the battle began. And 4 minutes and 23 seconds later, it was over. It wasn't a fight. It was a surgical procedure. The human fleet moved like a single living creature, an orchestra playing a silent symphony of precise energy beams. They didn't fire missiles or plasma cannons. They fired lances of light that surgically sliced through and shut down critical systems. Engines sputtered and went dead. Weapon batteries went dark. Shield generators gave one last pathetic whine before fizzling out. One by one, 60 of the hegemony's most powerful warships were turned into helpless, drifting coffins. Not a single ship was destroyed. The Dominance was the last to go silent. Torax watched in stunned disbelief as his bridge went dark, the red emergency lights casting long, grim shadows. His weapons were offline. His engines were dead. A single voice cut through the silence, broadcast directly to his powerless bridge. "Fleet Commander Torax," Admiral Chen said, "your ships have been neutralized. Your crews will be taken into custody, and we are dispatching medical teams for your injured. Let me be perfectly clear. Your crusade of conquest has ended." The channel clicked off. Torax slumped into his command chair, utterly broken. His entire fleet dismantled in less than 5 minutes without a single human casualty. What had they been building out there in the dark all those years? On Sanctuary Station, Priyeth watched the tactical display through a blur of tears. The Vakari ships were dark and lifeless, floating harmlessly inside the protective cradle of the human fleet. And from that fleet, dozens of smaller ships were now launching, not to deliver a final blow, but heading directly for the disabled enemy ships, their lights flashing the universal sign for medical aid. Her comms officer's voice was breathless. "Station Master, we're getting a signal from the human flagship." "On the main screen now," she commanded. The face of an older woman materialized, streaks of silver in her hair and a deep, unshakable calm in her eyes. "Station Master, I am Admiral Chen Wei. Sanctuary Station is secure. We are moving humanitarian ships into the area to provide any assistance you require. Do not be alarmed by our fleet." Priyeth tried to speak, but her throat was too tight. The one question that burned in her mind finally escaped. "Why?" she whispered, her voice cracking. "Why would you help us?" Admiral Chen gave her a smile, one that was filled with a stunning, genuine warmth. "Because someone had to, because we could, and because it's just what we do." "But you don't owe us anything," Pry protested. "We aren't your people." "As of today, you are," Chen said with a gentle finality. "Get some rest, Station Master. We've got you." The screen went dark. Pry fell back into her command chair, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she let herself weep. For 12 long years, she had screamed the desperate pleas of her refugees into the void, only to be answered by the cold silence of the galaxy. For 12 years, she had begged the conquered for aid that never came. And now, out of the deepest black, help had just shown up. It made no sense, and a part of her was sure it never would. But for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt a flicker of something she thought was gone for good. Hope. Light years away, on Velithos Prime, the Concord's emergency summit had devolved into absolute chaos. News of the battle had just arrived, and the delegates were shell-shocked, completely unable to process what had just happened. Can you imagine being told that your very existence is a crime? That was the reality for 50,000 refugees, trapped and seconds away from being wiped out by a fleet of 1,000 warships from the ruthless Vicari hegemony. But just as their shields were about to collapse, the impossible occurred. A mysterious fleet dropped out of hyperspace, disabling the entire enemy force in just a few minutes with technology so advanced it made the galaxy's top warships look like antiques. So the big question is, were these newcomers saviors, or were they an even bigger threat? Stick around to find out. Inside the Galactic Council, Ambassador Vareth's scales were flashing with pure, unfiltered rage. "This is an act of war," he bellowed. "The humans attacked a hegemony fleet without provocation." The Salathi representative fired back. "Without provocation? Your ships were about to murder 50,000 people. Those refugees were giving shelter to our enemies. We had every right." "You had no right to do a thing," a voice cut through the noise, silencing the entire chamber. High Chancellor Morph was at the central podium, her silver robes shimmering under the lights. Her face was a mask of perfect calm, but her eyes held a fire that instantly snuffed out every argument in the room. "For 80 years, we ignored the humans," she said, her voice reaching every corner. "We dismissed them as primitives, as irrelevant. We assumed their silence was a sign of weakness." She paused, letting her words sink in. We were wrong. With a single touch on her console, the main screen lit up with classified footage from conquered spy drones. 1,000 ghostly ships appearing out of nowhere. The entire Vicari fleet, dead in the water in a matter of minutes. And then, footage of human medics providing aid to the very same enemy soldiers they had just defeated. "The humans have just shown us what they are capable of," Morph said, her tone flat. "And now we have to decide how to respond. But before you all start shouting again, I want you to think about something." Her gaze swept over the chamber, across the faces of delegates from 100 different worlds. The humans could have destroyed the Vicari fleet. They chose to disable it. They could have left those crews to die in the vacuum of space. They chose to save them. The reality of her words fell over the room, creating a heavy, disbelieving silence. Whatever the humans are, whatever their ultimate plan is, they are not like us. They don't play by our rules. And maybe, she added, her voice dropping to almost a whisper, that is exactly what this broken galaxy needs. The chamber erupted in a fresh wave of arguments, but Morph wasn't listening anymore. She was already planning her next move, a direct face-to-face meeting with an admiral named Chen, and the beginning of a new chapter for a galaxy that had just been turned completely upside down. The humans were finished with hiding. They had just announced their presence to the galaxy in a big way. On board the human carrier, Mercy, the medical bay was an island of calm, with only the soft beeping of monitors breaking the silence. In bed after bed lay wounded Vicari soldiers, their injuries treated, their pain gone, their lives saved by the very species they'd been sent to destroy. Lieutenant Kareth was one of them, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of the impossible. Just 12 hours ago, he was getting ready to lead a bombing run on that refugee station. Now, he was a prisoner of war, being offered a glass of water by his enemy. A human woman walked over to his bed. She was smaller than him, with warm brown skin and hands that moved with a gentle practiced skill. She had on a medic's uniform and was carrying a tray with a bowl of steaming soup. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her accent in galactic standard perfect. Karath didn't answer right away, his mind scrambling to find logic where there was none. His warship had been completely disabled, its life support systems failing. He had prepared for the end. But instead, human rescue teams had cut through his ship's hull and pulled him out of the wreckage. "Why?" he finally managed to ask, his throat scratchy from the smoke. "Why? What?" she replied softly. "Why save me? I am your enemy. My orders were to destroy everyone on that station." He paused, the words feeling like poison in his mouth. "We would have killed you too." The human medic put the tray down and pulled a chair up next to his bed. "You were following your orders," she said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. "You were doing what your leaders told you to do, That doesn't make it okay, but it doesn't make you a monster either." "That's not a real answer," he growled, his voice low and angry. "No," she agreed, thinking for a second. "I guess it isn't. The real answer is, we help people because this is who we decided to be. We built this fleet to protect those who can't protect themselves, yes, but we also built it knowing that the soldiers on the other side are people too. You have families, you have people who love you, your life matters." Karath just slowly shook his head, unable to believe what he was hearing. The hegemony would never show this kind of mercy. If your ships were floating out here, helpless, our medics wouldn't be saving you. Your survivors would be thrown in chains or worse. "I know," she said simply. "Then why?" he pushed, his voice almost begging for an answer. "Because we are not you." The words were so simple, but they hit him like a physical force. "We could be," she went on. "We have more than enough firepower to do whatever we want, but we chose a different way. We chose to be better." Karath was quiet for a long, long time. His entire life, he'd been taught that strength was about control, that power meant dominating others, and that mercy was just a weakness to be taken advantage of. And now, lying in an enemy hospital, being cared for by a species he was supposed to hate, his entire world was falling apart. "What's going to happen to us?" he finally asked. "You'll be looked after here until the diplomats work things out. Then you'll be sent home to your government. No one is going to be hurt. No one is going to be mistreated." She got up and gestured to the tray she'd brought. "You should eat something. You'll need your strength to get better." As she walked away to check on another one of his crewmates, Karath was left alone with his thoughts and a bowl of hot soup that smelled, to his absolute shock, incredibly delicious. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, High Chancellor Morth's shuttle was making its final approach to the human flagship, the Prometheus. She had insisted on this meeting herself, waving off the frantic objections of her advisors. Admiral Chen had agreed instantly. The shuttle bay of the Prometheus was breathtaking, big enough to fit a dozen of her own capital ships inside. As her shuttle touched down, she saw a group waiting for her, their crisp, clean uniforms a sharp contrast to the panicked state of her own government. Admiral Chen stood at the front of the group. She was shorter than Morvith expected, but she had a solid confidence about her that commanded respect. "High Chancellor," Chen said, offering her hand in the traditional human greeting. "Welcome aboard." Morvith carefully took her hand, remembering the quick cultural briefings she'd been given. "Admiral Chen, thank you for agreeing to see me. The Conquered wants an explanation." "After 80 years of being ignored," Chen answered with a slight smile, "I bet you have a lot of questions." "More than you could ever imagine," Morvith confessed. Chen led her through the massive ship to a private meeting room. It was surprisingly simple, with a single wall of windows looking out into the star-filled darkness of space and a plain table in the center. No guards, no weapons in sight. It was just two leaders sitting across from each other. "So ask me," Chen invited. Morvith took a seat, her mind racing to untangle the hundreds of questions she had. She'd gone over this meeting in her head for days, but now the simplest question felt like the only one that mattered. "Why did you hide?" she finally asked. "Your technology is centuries ahead of ours. You could have dominated the entire galaxy from the very beginning. Why stay in the shadows for so long?" Chen's smile was laced with a hint of sorrow. "Because we attended your council meetings 80 years ago. We watched, we listened, and we saw endless arguments that went nowhere while entire civilizations were left to suffer. We saw the powerful feast on the weak while your so-called alliance just stood by and watched. We took one look at that broken system," she said, her eyes flashing with intensity, "and knew we wanted nothing to do with it." "So you just hid from the entire galaxy?" Morvith challenged. "No, we prepared. There's a universe of difference," Chen corrected her gently. "If we had come out with guns blazing before we understood the galaxy, before we had the wisdom to manage our own power, we would have just become another empire. We'd be conquerors, not saviors. That's what always happens when strength doesn't come with principles." "So what is it you want now?" "To build something new. Something better," Chen declared. "A galaxy where the strong actually shield the weak instead of preying on them. A government where discussion actually leads to action, where we stop turning a blind eye to suffering just because it's easier. Morph considered her words. They sounded beautiful, but she had heard beautiful words before. How can I be sure you won't just force this new reality on us? Your fleet is powerful enough to dismantle the Conquered before breakfast tomorrow. You're right. It could, Chen admitted, her voice steady as a rock. But it won't. We didn't spend 80 years building this fleet just to become the new galactic bullies. We built it to be a shield. A shield for who? Morvith asked, her skepticism clear in her voice. For everyone, Chen replied simply. Every species, every planet, every single soul who can't fight for themselves. This galaxy has seen plenty of empires. It's had alliances built on nothing but greed. What it's never had is a power that exists for one single purpose, to defend the defenseless. For a moment, Morvith was completely speechless. In her long career, she had met countless leaders who made countless promises. Most of them were empty. But she saw a fire in Admiral Chen's eyes that was so real, it almost dared her to believe. What are you asking of the Conquered? She finally managed to say. A partnership, Chen answered without a moment's hesitation. Not obedience, not tribute, not control. A real partnership. We want to work with anyone who believes that with great power comes an even greater responsibility. She stood up and walked to the viewport, staring out at the endless sea of stars. The Vicari aren't going to just give up. This defeat will only make them angrier. They'll rebuild, and they will be back. The only way to stop this cycle for good is to build an alliance so powerful that the very thought of starting a war becomes insane. We're proposing a new coalition, an alliance that's open to any species that agrees to its founding principles. Humanity would be one member among equals, not the one calling the shots. We have absolutely no interest in running anyone's lives but our own. Morvith got up and stood next to Chen at the window, looking into the deep, star-dusted darkness. An infinite ocean of lights, and every single one was a world, a civilization, a dream. You do realize, don't you, that some of the worlds you defeated will never, ever trust you, she said softly. They'll always see you as a threat, no matter what you say. I know, and that will be their choice. We won't make anyone join, but we also won't let anyone keep playing the old game of exploitation. The days of standing by while the innocent are crushed are over. That sounds a whole lot like an ultimatum. Think of it more like a line we've drawn in the stardust. We've decided what we will and will not stand for. Now, it's up to everyone else to decide where they want to stand. Morvith turned, looking Chen directly in the eyes. I've been High Chancellor for 60 years. I have watched the Conquered promise greatness and deliver absolutely nothing, time and time again. I've watched entire species be dragged off into slavery while we argued about the proper forms for filing a complaint. I have hated myself for being so completely helpless to stop any of it. She took a deep, shaky breath, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know if I can trust you, Admiral. I don't know if your dream is even possible. But I know for a fact that the old way is broken beyond repair. And if there is even the smallest chance we can build something better, I have to be a part of it. A genuine warm smile finally spread across Chen's face. Then let's get to work. 3 days later, Admiral Chen stood before the Galactic Concord. The Grand Assembly Hall was packed to the rafters. Every known species had sent someone. You could feel the tension in the air. Some delegates looked at Chen with pure terror in their eyes. Others looked at her with a tiny, fragile spark of hope. But most of them just looked completely and utterly lost. Chen stood at the central podium, all alone, with no weapon, ready to face the judgment of an entire galaxy. I know you have questions, she began, her voice calm and strong. I know you're afraid. A new power has appeared from nowhere, with technology you can't comprehend and motives you can only guess at. If I were in your shoes, I'd be scared too. She scanned the massive hall, trying to lock eyes with as many of the delegates as she could. So let me tell you who we are. 80 years ago, humanity discovered we were not alone. You invited us to join your great civilization, so we sent observers to watch and learn your ways. And what we saw, broke our hearts. The giant view screen behind her came to life, showing images that many in the room had tried hard to forget. The Malari famine, the pointless, endless debates, the species that just vanished while the conquered did nothing at all. We saw 12 billion people starve to death while this group debated a proper response. We saw the Ricari enslave millions while you argued over sanctions. We saw one tragedy after another unfold, and so we made a choice. Chen's voice turned as hard as steel. We swore to ourselves we would never be part of a system that allowed such horrors. But we also swore that when we finally did step out of the shadows, we would not become the very monsters we wanted to stop. She gestured, and the screen changed, now showing the battle at Sanctuary Station. The 1,000 human ships, the entire Ricari fleet disabled in minutes, and human medics treating their wounded enemies. We built our fleet to be a shield for the innocent. We built it with enough power to shatter any force that preys on the helpless. But we also built it with the discipline to show mercy, to save lives when it would have been so much easier to just destroy them. That is who we are. That is what we stand for. Chen paused, letting the power of her words sink into the silent room. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm not here to demand that you follow me. I'm here to offer you a choice. You can keep going down the same path, arguing while innocent people suffer, propping up a system that protects the powerful by grinding the weak into dust. Or you can join us, and together we can build something new. And what exactly are you proposing? Ambassador Breath yelled from the floor. His voice was dripping with venom, but Chen could hear the fear trembling beneath it. A coalition, open to any species that pledges to follow its core principles, that the strong have a duty to protect the weak, that aggression will not be tolerated, and that suffering will be met with action, not empty words. Humanity will have one voice among many, not be the rulers of this new alliance. We're looking for partners, not servants. And if we refuse, then you refuse. We won't force a single person to join, but we will not stand by and allow the old ways to continue. If another species is threatened, if another people are facing slavery or extinction, we will intervene, with or without the conquered's permission. The chamber erupted into a storm of shouting, but Chen just stood there, waiting with perfect patience for the chaos to die down. You have 80 years of our silence to consider, she said at last. 80 years where humanity watched and learned and prepared. We could have come sooner. We chose to wait until we were certain we could do this the right way. She looked around the hall one last time. Now, we are ready. The only question is, are you? She stepped down from the podium and walked right out of the grand hall, leaving 200 species to argue about a future that had already arrived. The galaxy was never going to be the same. A year had gone by since the battle at Sanctuary Station, and the galactic map was completely redrawn. The Ricari hegemony was gone, not because humanity destroyed it, but because its own oppressed people rose up. Once the conquered world saw that fighting back was actually an option, once they knew a power existed that would watch their back, they found a courage they thought had been beaten out of them forever. One planet after another threw off the shackles of their masters. The massive empire rotted from the inside out, leaving the Ricari to finally answer for centuries of cruelty. The galactic concord itself had shattered. Some species clung to the old ways, hiding out in their home systems and hoping this huge wave of change would just pass them by. While most of the galaxy was scrambling to join the new alliance humanity had forged, publicly embracing ideals they had privately ignored for centuries, Admiral Chen Wei was looking at the results. She stood gazing out of an observation deck on a station orbiting the planet they now called New Dawn. Just 6 months ago, this world had been a Vicari mining colony, a brutal labor camp filled with the enslaved people of a dozen different species. Now, it was a sanctuary. It was a place where beings who had known nothing but pain could finally begin to heal and piece their lives back together. Human volunteers were working side by side with people from every corner of the galaxy, raising homes, schools, and clinics from the dust. Doctors and nurses were treating wounds that some of these survivors had carried for decades, while teachers were helping children learn to read and write in their native tongues for the very first time. For 3 generations, her family had known nothing but chains. Her grandmother died in the mines. Her mother was worked until her body broke, and she herself was born into that same cruel slavery. But her children would be born free. So how did one person, leading a single fleet, manage to bring down a galactic empire that had ruled with an iron fist for centuries? It's a story about a completely different kind of power, and it might just change how you see everything. Stick around to find out what happened. The revolution started with two things the brutal hegemony had outlawed: compassion and mercy. Commander Webb came to stand beside Admiral Chen at the window, looking like he'd aged a decade in the past year. They all had. It turned out that building something new was infinitely more difficult than tearing something old down. The Salathi Republic just made it official, he said. They've joined the coalition. That brings our count to 47 species. That's good news. Any holdouts? The usual suspects. Ambassador Breath is still trying to cause trouble, but nobody's listening to him anymore. And the Colossi Dominion is too busy with its own internal power struggles to give us a second thought. Chen gave a small nod. She had always expected there would be resistance. What she never saw coming was how quickly the whole rotten structure would collapse once the first piece was knocked loose. There's one more thing, Webb added. Former Fleet Commander Torax is requesting a meeting. He was released and sent back to his people, but he says he has something important to tell you. Now, that was a surprise. Torax was the commander who had led the attack on Sanctuary Station. His capture was the turning point of that entire battle. What's this about? He wouldn't say. Just that he came all this way to ask you himself. Chen considered it for a moment. Show him to my office. Let's hear what he has to say. 30 minutes later, Torax entered Chen's office. He was just a shadow of the man he'd been, looking much thinner than he was a year ago. The brilliant shine of his scales had faded to a dull, matte finish, and the overwhelming arrogance that once radiated from him was completely gone. Defeat had utterly remade him, right down to his soul. Admiral Chen, he said, his voice strained but filled with a grudging respect. Thank you for agreeing to see me. Former Commander, Chen gestured to a chair. Please, have a seat. Torax slumped into the chair with a heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of a fallen empire. He stared down at his hands for a long time, as if searching for the right words. I spent my entire life believing in the hegemony's cause, he began. I was raised to think that strength was the only thing that mattered. That power was meant to be used, and that the strong had a natural right to rule over the weak. I ended lives for that belief. I conquered worlds for it. I enslaved countless innocent beings because I was convinced that was just the way the universe was supposed to work. He finally looked up, meeting her gaze. And then you destroyed my entire fleet in under 4 minutes without causing a single casualty on my ships. You captured me, and then you treated my wounds. You gave me food and water, and you spoke to me like I was a person, not just a defeated enemy. You are a person, Torax, Chen said, her tone soft but firm. That's the entire point. I never understood that. The very idea that you could show dignity to an enemy, that you could win without being cruel, that you could hold so much power and choose to be merciful, it was completely alien to me. Torax shook his head, still looking stunned by the memory. During my time as your prisoner, I did nothing but think. I thought about every life I had ruined, every world I had broken, every horrible thing I had done in the name of the hegemony. And I realized I had wasted my whole life serving a lie. Chen said nothing, letting him speak. She had seen this happen with other Vakari prisoners before, their entire worldview crumbling after their first real encounter with basic human decency. These were the kinds of moments that gave her real hope for the future they were all fighting to build. Torax's voice was heavy with emotion as he spoke. The hegemony is gone. My people are shattered, scattered across the stars. All we have to our name is our shame. He seemed to straighten up then, a hint of the old general returning to his eyes. But I've come to realize that shame can be the soil where something better grows. I am here to offer my help to your coalition. Chen was genuinely caught off guard. To do what exactly? She asked. Whatever you need, he answered. I know Vicari military strategy inside and out. I know where they hid their weapons, who the war criminals are that got away, and all the dark secrets the hegemony kept hidden even from its own top leadership. He paused, taking a deep breath. And I can reach the other Vicari, he added. The ones who are adrift right now, completely lost, with no idea how to live in a galaxy that isn't all about conquest. I can be the living proof that there's a different way forward. Chen studied the old warrior, sizing him up. She had become a sharp judge of character in her time, and what she saw in his eyes was pure, unfiltered honesty. His old arrogance had been burned away by his defeat and the quiet reflection that followed. In its place stood a man desperate to make amends for his past. You understand that many species will never forgive the Vicari for what they did, don't you? She said gently. You might have to live the rest of your life being hated for atrocities you can never take back. I know, he replied, but I have to try. I have to do something, anything, to help set things right, even if the scales can never be perfectly balanced again. He looked her right in the eye. I learned about one of your human proverbs, the one that says the longest journey begins with a single step. A small smile touched Chen's lips. Yes, we have a saying like that. Then let this be my first step, Torak said. Whatever you ask, whatever I can do to help, I'm ready. I'm not here asking for you to forgive me. I'm here asking for a chance to earn it. Chen was quiet for a long moment, weighing his words. Finally, she gave him a slow, deliberate nod. We have a program for former hegemony soldiers who want to help rebuild. You'll start at the very bottom. You'll be taking orders, not giving them. You'll be doing manual labor, whatever is needed. It's not a glamorous job. I wouldn't expect it to be. In that case, welcome to the coalition, Torax. Let's see what you can build now that you're done tearing things down. That evening, Chen was down on the surface of New Dawn for a dedication ceremony. A new community center, built by volunteers from a dozen different species, was opening its doors. It was designed to be the heart of the settlement's rapidly growing population. The crowd was a beautiful mix of faces that would have been impossible to imagine just 1 year ago. Former slaves were mingling with their former captors. Species that had been at war for generations were now working together, hanging lights and setting up chairs. And their children were all playing together, completely unaware of the ancient hatreds their parents had finally learned to let go of. As the ceremony wound down, a young woman approached Chen. She was from a species the hegemony had nearly wiped out. Her people had been down to just a few thousand survivors before the coalition liberated them. Admiral Chen, she said, her voice shaking a little as her translator device worked to keep up. Can I have a word with you? Of course. I just wanted to say thank you. My family, we were slaves for 3 generations. My grandmother died in the mines. My mother was worked to death. I was born in chains. Tears started to well up in her eyes. And now, because of you and your people, my children are going to be born free. Chen felt that familiar tightness in her own throat. We only did what should have been done a long, long time ago. But no one else did it, the young woman whispered. You did. She reached out and took Chen's hand. Is it true what they say? That your people waited 100 years before you did anything? That you could have stopped this sooner? It was a question Chen had heard many times before, and it never got any easier to answer. Yes, you're right, she admitted quietly. We could have stepped out of the shadows much, much earlier. So why didn't you? Chen looked out at the incredible sea of faces, at former slaves and former soldiers, all figuring out how to live side by side in peace. She saw the children who would get to grow up without ever knowing the nightmares their parents had lived through. Because if we had revealed ourselves back then, she explained softly, we would have shown up as conquerors, not liberators. We had to take the time to understand how to be powerful without becoming the very monsters we were trying to defeat. The young woman took that in for a moment. So what happens now? A small smile played on Chen's lips as she remembered a conversation with High Chancellor Morph a year ago when the future was still a blank page. Now, she said. "We build something worth protecting." As the celebration died down, the crowds thinned out, melting into the warm evening. Chen took a peaceful stroll through the new settlement, just soaking it all in. The silhouettes of families heading back to their homes, the soft glow of lights turning on one after another. It was the image of a real community, born from the wreckage of a fallen empire. Just 1 year before, humanity had warped in at Sanctuary Station with 1,000 warships, changing the galaxy's history in a single day. But the fleet was never the real story. The real story was everything that came next, the hard decisions they agonized over, the principles they stood for, and the constant daily grind of making something out of nothing. This new coalition was a long way from perfect, and nobody pretended it was. There were going to be arguments, setbacks, and times when the ugly parts of their past would try to resurface. But they were making progress. It was a slow, deliberate march toward a future where power was meant to protect the vulnerable, not to prey on them. As the first stars began to dot the sky, Chen started back towards her shuttle. Her schedule for the next day was completely full, meeting new species who wanted to join their cause, negotiating with others who were still unsure, and going over the blueprints for the next phase of construction. The work was never-ending, but she didn't mind. In the real world, this is what hope felt like. For eons, the galaxy had just been a playground for empires and shaky alliances held together by greed and fear. It never had a true guardian, a power committed only to defending those who couldn't defend themselves, until now. Imagine a massive corporation was literally stealing the air you breathe, and the galactic government just looked the other way. That was the nightmare the Krill were trapped in. A titan called Vorkor was slowly strangling their planet for a profit, and the all-powerful Galactic Council did nothing. And who was caught in the middle of this mess? Ensign Eva Rostova. She wasn't a hero. She was a junior logistics officer on some forgotten space station, basically an accountant in a uniform. Her orders couldn't have been clearer. Keep your head down and don't ask questions. But Eva couldn't just ignore the desperate cries for help. If you've ever felt like a small person up against a giant broken system, then you need to hear what Eva did next. Stick around, because this is the story of how one person with nothing but her own courage took on an empire. Eva's entire life was buried in spreadsheets and cargo manifests. She wasn't a fighter. She tracked supplies. But she'd become friends with the Krill, a kind insect-like race that traded at her station. She learned that the beautiful crystal chimes they carved from their planet's moons weren't just pretty objects. Each one was a history, a family's entire story etched in crystal. And Vorkor was shattering those moons into dust. One afternoon, a young Krill she knew, Chetek, placed a small, flawed chime in her hand. It was a gift, but it was damaged and could barely make a sound. That night, her life was turned upside down. She stumbled upon a scrambled message from Vorkorp, and the words made her feel sick. They weren't just stealing the air, they were systematically poisoning it to wipe the Krill out. Panicked, Eva tried to send the proof to her commanding officer, but the file simply vanished. A second later, a blunt message flashed on her screen. Access revoked. They had cut her off. That's when the horrifying truth hit her. Her own captain was being paid by Vorkorp. She was completely alone, a prisoner on her own station. Or so she thought. In her desperation, she gripped the little broken chime and felt a tiny, almost invisible line. Prying it open, she discovered a microscopic data crystal tucked inside. The reveal was staggering. The Krill weren't a primitive race at all. They were post-technology. They had chosen to abandon their advanced tools centuries ago, but kept a backup for a true emergency. This crystal didn't just have proof of Vorkorp's crimes. It contained the blueprints for a revolutionary clean energy source that would make Vorkorp's whole business worthless. Eva knew she couldn't trust the corrupt council. So, using a forgotten old-fashioned communications dish, she bypassed all official channels and broadcast the crystal's data to every news network in the known galaxy. The result was instant chaos. Vorkorp's stock market value vanished in less than an hour. Its executives were arrested on live broadcast, and the council members involved were publicly disgraced. The Krill, finally safe, shared their incredible technology with everyone, sparking a new golden age. And Eva, the quiet accountant, became the face of a new galactic ideal. Humans weren't conquerors, they were guardians, the ones who listened when nobody else would. And for the very first time, a seat on the council wasn't offered to a general or a politician, but to a humble ensign who showed everyone that the most powerful weapon in the universe isn't a warship, it's the courage to do the right thing.